Tonight we are talking about sex. Who's excited? Hands in the air if you're excited about sex. A few, that's good. That's good. Now, I want to start by admitting for some of you in the room, this might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but this is an incredibly important topic to talk about. Because I was a teenager myself, and when I grew up in church, I got told that sex was something you don't do until you're married, because sex is something that a mummy and a daddy do when they love each other. Yeah? But then I got to high school, and I realized a whole bunch of my friends thought they were mummies and daddies, if you know what I mean. And you guys are probably laughing because you know what I mean. And see, it was there at school that for me, I got introduced to sexual education. Now, I'm not talking about in my classes, I'm talking about from conversations with my friends at recess, or as you guys like to call it, little lunch, whatever that is. Little lunch. What are you, 3? But so sex was talked about at recess and at lunchtime. It wasn't really talked about at church. It wasn't really talked about with my parents. I'd already had that one awkward conversation with my father about it, and I didn't want to have a second one because the first one was already really uncomfortable. And so I talked to my friends about this topic of sex. And for me, because I felt like I didn't know or didn't understand how to have this conversation or wasn't finding anyone to have this conversation with, I began to try and figure this thing out for myself. Now, I'm standing up here on stage, not claiming to be perfect. I've done some things in previous relationships before I was with Rachel that I'm not proud of, that I'm not that I wouldn't love telling everyone about. Now, I never had sex before marriage, but I did some other things along the way instead. And so for me, that's why this is so important. Because the truth is, you're all going to hear about it, people are going to be talking about it, and the question is, who are you going to have the conversation with? And I hope that you would have the conversation, not just with your friends, hopefully with your parents, but also with us as your youth group, as your church, as your leaders, because we want to support you as you try and navigate this, because this is a huge topic that people seem to be obsessed with at the moment. And for many of us in this room, some of you in the room will be on a spectrum around what you view sex as. You know, for some of you, be like, you know what, sex is kind of whatever, let two people do whatever they want to do, because, sex is just a physical thing. It doesn't really mean much, whatever. Whereas some of you might have this picture and this vision that you're going to save sex until marriage, and in fact, you're not even going to hold hands until you get married. You're going to be super pure, you're just going to go all out. No hand holding, no long eye gazes, because that could lead to something, Who here's seen Footloose? That whole dancing leads to, something else. Maybe you guys are like that. So, wherever you are in that spectrum, tonight we're going to talk about sex, because we all have a vision for how sex is going to play out in our life. And tonight I want to help us understand what God's plan for sex is and what His desire is for our lives. So let's jump into the Bible to see what the Bible says about sex. Now, when I was looking at this topic, I was very excited to find that Bible passage that says, don't have sex before marriage. Very excited to find it. And then I realized it isn't there. Yeah, that was my response too. I was like, now I'm going to have to do some hard work, because I thought originally that I would just be able to find that verse and say, look, don't do it. Done. I'll sit back down. We can go discuss it. But no, I couldn't find. There's no actual verse in the Bible that says don't have sex before marriage. Okay, now before you guys think, great, let's go hook up, none of that. But it doesn't say don't have sex before marriage. And that's because as I studied this, the Bible is actually even more clear about what it expects around this stuff, about what it expects around sex and how we involve sex in relationships. The Bible is even more clear than we think. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up to Exodus chapter 22, verses 16 to 17. If you've got your Bibles, feel free to open them and read along. But it's a very interesting little passage, but I think it helps us understand sex and relationships. And it says this, it says, if a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price and she shall be his wife. Yeah, if her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must still pay the bride price for virgins. See how clear that is? Do you guys understand? Yes? Pray. Basically, you have to understand that you need to pay the bride price. No, I'm just kidding. There's none of that. But basically, what it's saying here is this is a scenario where a man and a woman who aren't pledged to be married to each other. Remember that this is a time when marriages were arranged. You didn't get to choose who you married based on love. Basically, girls, your father would come in one day and say, guess what? You're marrying Antonio. And that would be it. And you'd be like, all right, thanks, Dad. Appreciate it. I've got a husband. Like, who wants to sign up for that, girls? Yeah, Antonio. He's a great guy. Sorry if there's any Antonios in the room. You're probably amazing. And so what happens is, this is a situation where they aren't pledged to be married to each other and they have sex. They have sex. And see, what happens is the man has to pay the bride price, which was part of the arranged marriage, and the woman becomes his wife. The woman becomes his wife. And see, Exodus was written to newly free people of Israel, and these guidelines were being given to help support the flourishing of people's lives and the community. And it had things about how to care for outcasts, how to deal with slaves, and also how to deal with marriage. And so, it's weird, I don't know if you noticed in that, but it never talks about you need to have a wedding ceremony, it never talks about vows, never talks walking down with your nice, bridal dress on and men in their suits and having the perfect, photo opportunities. It doesn't talk about any of that sort of stuff. It just says they've slept together, they've had sex, and now she's going to become his wife. And then I found this other little passage in Genesis chapter 24, verse 67. And it says this, it says, Isaac brought her is Rebecca. We've just missed it from the verse before. But Isaac brought Rebecca into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebecca. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now, I want to ask you a question. How did Isaac marry Rebecca in a tent? Do you think there was a priest in there? Nah. Do you think there was some vows exchanged, a great photo opportunity? Do you think she was wearing a wedding dress? No, probably not. Because that's not what they're trying to say. They're saying something different. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother, Sarah, and he married Rebecca. See, we're adults here. So Isaac went into the tent and he had sex with Rebecca. That's basically what happened. That is what happened in this story. And this is what's so important for us to understand. In the Exodus passage, God is saying, if you guys sleep together, you need to become married. And in this passage, it's using the word married as a euphemism, as like a slang term to having slept together. Because actually, while the Bible doesn't say don't have sex before marriage, for God, sex is marriage. Get that around your head. Yeah, for God, sex is marriage. For God, sex is marriage, and marriage is sex. Because sex is the act that joins the two together. Sex is the act of marriage. That's what the Bible's saying. So actually, it doesn't say don't have sex before marriage because you can't have sex before marriage because you can't separate them. Sex is marriage. That's why it doesn't say it in the Bible, because they're actually so closely linked that you can't separate them. That sex is what joins us physically, spiritually, as a family unit, and psychologically, it even helps us join us together. Now, fun fact, does anyone do any psychology or any of that sort of stuff? Maybe some of you older guys and younger guys, you do it. But there's been this study around what helps people bond together psychologically. Like, why do people get married and then never leave each other? Like, psychologically, what happens? And so what they've discovered is that in the act of marriage and the act of sex, there's a chemical released in your brain called oxytocin. Yeah. Now, oxytocin is a chemical that helps you bond. Now, to help you understand the level of bonding, oxytocin is the chemical that is released when a mother gives birth to a child. So what happens is when a mother gives birth to a child, the child is born, and then a huge rush of oxytocin fills the mother's brain as she looks at this child, and it bonds her psychologically and chemically to her child. That's why there's that whole thing of mothers just love kids, and the whole don't get between a mother bear and her cub, because this whole idea that mothers love their kids in a way that you can't understand. And it's literally chemically and psychologically in a way that's different to fathers, because we don't have that same experience. But mothers bond to their kids. And what they're realizing psychologically is that when we have sex with someone else, that is the same chemical that is released. It is a bonding chemical. It's meant to help us bond to the other person chemically and psychologically. And do you want to know the craziest part about this chemical? The first time you ever have sex with someone, like let's say this much oxytocin is released, that much is released. If you were then to break up with that person and have sex with someone else, this much oxytocin gets released. And then if you were to do that again, the third time, this much oxytocin gets released. And the fourth time, and the fifth time, and the sixth time. And so what happens is, chemically and psychologically, it can be harder for people to bond together when people are sleeping around. Now, that doesn't mean that, if you're sitting here, I know some of you, maybe you feel like I've already ruined it, maybe I'm already stuffed up, this is never going to work for me. Hold on, there's hope, okay? But I want you to just get that picture that actually this is helping us understand that psychologically and chemically God has actually designed it so that sex is marriage because, psychologically it's meant to help us bond. More than that, it's because when you get married, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but there's parts of you that no one else will ever know about you, that only your husband or your wife will know. See, I am married to the incredible Rachel, and Rachel knows things about me that nobody else in this room does or ever will. What a shame. Thank you. Yeah, there's things about me, like about my temperament, about what I like, about what I don't like, about how I respond in certain situations, about how I feel about myself, about how I feel about Rachel and other people and about God, that only Rachel is going to know. Only Rachel will know those things. And sex is designed to be the physical aspect of intimacy too, where there's actually something about you physically that only one other person knows. Because marriage is all about exclusive intimacy. So when you get married, there's meant to be this idea that you are like connected to this other person, bonded to this person for the rest of your life to the exclusion of all others. That there's meant to be stuff about you and about her that you guys are the only two people who ever know about it. And so that should be emotionally, that should be spiritually, that should be like mentally, and that should be physically. And sex is meant to be that act, that actually that is a part of you that only this other person knows. There's an exclusive intimacy that's found in marriage, and sex is a part of it. And so sex is marriage because we see that God has designed us to bond together, that God has designed us to have exclusive intimacy in marriage, and sex is all a part of that. Now, I hope you can actually see the beautiful intentionality of God and how He's designed sex as marriage. And that's why we need to treat sex so seriously, because we need to understand the magnitude of it. We need to understand how important it is, and that we can't just look at it as a physical act anymore. It's actually something more than just physical. It's psychological, it's mental, it's spiritual, because God has designed our bodies to symbolize the seriousness of sex. And see, only death is meant to separate people who have been joined. And so I hope you can see that this vision of sex is a little bit more than what you probably hear on the playground or what you maybe see in movies, that's just a bit casual, it's a bit do whatever. That actually God has created us to bond together with one other person intentionally. That is how God has created sex. Now, I know that potentially there's some people in this room right now who are like, okay, that's cool, Ben. I'll save sex for marriage, saying sex is marriage. But what can I get away with? Or how far is too far? I'm sure some of you people have asked that question, or you've been asked that question. How far is too far? And what I want to, encourage you with is actually that I think that's the wrong question. If you're asking how far is too far, really you're asking what can I get away with? What can I do before marriage? I kind of want to do something, so what can I do? How far is too far? And we just get into this whole little details. Oh, well, does that really count? Does that mean anything? What does that do? That is the wrong question. See, the question I think we need to be asking is what legacy, what sexual legacy will I have? Now, I know that sounds like a weird word because, you might be thinking of Hugh Hefner when I think of sexual legacy. Like some guy who slept with a whole bunch of girls, that's a, sexual legacy. But I'm talking about this from a different perspective. I'm talking about this from what names and what acts do you want attached to your story? Now, I'm standing up here, as I said, from someone who's not perfect, who didn't get it right the whole time. I did things that I shouldn't have done with girls that I wasn't, married to. I did that. I didn't get the perfect story. So I'm not standing here going, it's easy, just do it, whatever. Like, I get the battle. But actually, I want to tell you from my perspective on the other side of marriage why I realized that I wish I'd known this earlier. Because there's something frustrating, anger-inducing, and painful about having to look at your wife and say, hey, when I was 17, I did this with this person. When I was 19, I did this with this person. When I was 21, I did this with this person. Instead of being able to say, which I wish I could have been able to say, and this is why I want to talk to you guys about it tonight, because I want you to be able to have the chance to have a different story. I wish I could have been able to say to her, you were the only one. Didn't date anyone else, didn't kiss anyone else. You were the only one. I just wish I could have had that. But because I didn't get this down early, I played around with it, I stuffed around with it, and I didn't quite get that part of my story right. And not just that, this is the thing that I've realized now that I'm married, is that one day I'm going to have that same conversation with my kids. You guys might have, I don't know if you have, you might have asked your parents, hey, was dad your only, boyfriend, or, was mum your only girlfriend? You ask those questions, and your parents have had to respond to that. And actually, the truth is that your story doesn't just end with you. Like, it doesn't just mean when you're 16 or when you're, 17 or whatever, and you're fooling around with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, that actually that ends there. Like, that carries with you. That's a part of your story. That's something you have to talk to your husband, your wife, your kids down the track. And so I want to ask you, have you thought about what stories and what names you want attached to you? Because I genuinely think that the best thing, and like I said, I'm saying this from the other side, I wish I'd got it right when I was younger. So I didn't have anything to say to Rachel other than, I waited for you, you're the only one. Because I tell you what, that would have been a beautiful gift to give to my wife. And finally, the last thing I want to say as we get ready to finish up, is that often what you guys hear, and you might even hear it from your friends, is this whole idea that actually sex is a race. It's not about this whole idea of saving yourself for marriage. It's about experiencing it as quickly as you possibly can. Because there's this weird thing in our world around us at the moment that basically says you can't be fully satisfied and fulfilled as a person until you've had sex. That sex is about fulfillment. That sex brings this new aspect to your life that you would never know without it. And I want to stand here and say that actually sex isn't about fulfillment. I went 26 years without sex, and I'm pretty okay, like some of you guys know, I'm a little weird, but that's not from the sex, that's just from other stuff, okay? Promise. You will be perfectly fine, you will be perfectly okay without it in your life. Now, I want to quickly point to the Bible. Now, two of the most influential people in the Bible never had sex in their entire life. The Apostle Paul was a Pharisee, like a rabbi. He never had sex in his entire life. And he went and shared Jesus with thousands of people, millions of people potentially, and started churches left, right, and center. He's got like a buttload of books in the Bible. Paul, the guy who didn't have sex at all. That sounds like a pretty fulfilling, meaningful, and purposeful life. Now, don't let me forget, Jesus never had sex, died for your sins, changed the course of human history. I think that's a pretty meaningful, purposeful, and satisfied life without sex. And so what I want to help you understand is don't believe the lies that you're told sometimes. You will be perfectly fine, you'll be perfectly okay, you'll have a perfectly meaningful and purposeful life and fulfilling life without sex. You can wait for sex. You can wait for it. I'm telling you now, you can wait for it. So stop putting it on a pedestal, because your life won't be more fulfilling with it, because it's never about fulfillment, it's about commitment. And that's what we see all through the Bible, that actually sex is marriage. God's designed us to be committed to one person for our entire lives in the covenant of marriage, and that actually sex isn't about our personal fulfillment, it is about commitment. And we have to think about the stories that are attached to our lives. So, I want to encourage you that if you take this seriously, if you really start thinking through what like sexual legacy do you want to have attached to your life, how do you want to live your life from now, you will see things change. Because the truth is, Some of you may have already stuffed up, and if you have, that's okay. Like, you're still welcome here. You're still a part of the community here. There's no judgment here. There's only love and grace and support here, because I've been there. But I'm telling you right now, you can change your story. And I'm telling you guys right now that if you're young and you haven't, feel like you stuffed this up, you haven't mucked around with it, you can set a direction, a clear direction of where you want to go and how you want to get there, that is going to see you free of guilt, free of shame, free of regret, free of soul ties, free of things in your life that you go, man, I can't believe I did that. I wish I'd never done it. And now I'm going to have to talk to my wife or my future spouse later. And it's just going to be something that you're going to wish you never did. See, you'll see better relationships in your life. You'll honor those that you're in a relationship with, because you realize that there's no guarantee that you'll get it right in dating, and this leaves things in such a great place. You'll have a clear conscience with your life and with your wife, no awkward conversations, no history that you hate to look back on, and you will give this as a gift to your kids too. You'll be able to say to them, I saved myself for your mum, and it helps set them up for success, biologically, spiritually, and in your relationship with them, and talking all things sex.